Hey friends, I was just changing out my garden from the summer season to the cool season, and it got me thinking about some of the lessons that I've learned along the way that have made gardening so much easier for me, and I wanted to share some of those with you. I realize that the initial excitement with starting a new garden can be pretty captivating, and I know I certainly have gotten carried away in the past, and still do actually at the end of every season, and I get these big plans about what I want to do, and I want to plant all of these things. But the truth is that sometimes we can get a little ahead of ourselves and a little ahead of our skill level. So I wanted to share my best advice with you on the things that I've learned for starting a successful garden in hopes that it will help you too. There are some really important things to think about when you're beginning your garden, either at the beginning of the season or your journey in general, that can really help set you up for success. So here are my best pieces of advice for you. Although I probably wouldn't have admitted it out loud, I expected my garden to be as beautiful and productive as the gardens that had inspired me to begin in the first place. I thought I would sow seeds and plant my transplants and that nature would just appear and that everything would be beautiful. But that is not the reality of beginning a garden. Soils must be built, ecosystems must be created, and gardeners must be made. And all of that takes time, which leads me to my next point. The most important thing I learned when I started my garden is to start small. Start with a few containers or a few pots and then learn as you go on a small scale, and pretty soon you're going to be ready to transform a much bigger space. I didn't start out here. I started with a few pots on a balcony, and then I used stock tanks as raised beds, and after that I grew into a small plot at a community garden, and now here I am much later in this bigger space. But all along, I was learning the skills and the time management I needed to handle a bigger space. It is really easy in the beginning to get carried away in your excitement for beginning such a new project. I have done that myself. I have built gardens that are way beyond my skill level and my time to be able to manage them. And that can quickly become overwhelming and lead to discouraging results. If you're patient with yourself and you allow yourself the time and the space to learn the skills that you need, pretty soon you're going to have a beautiful and productive garden like the one you're dreaming about. My next point may seem pretty obvious and basic, but it is hard to remember when you get excited about planting your new garden. And it's even hard for me to remember from season to season after gardening for all of these years. And that is to plant what you actually like to eat. It's so easy to look at the list for the cool season or the warm season vegetables and think, oh, well, it's October or November, I should plant kohlrabi, or I should plant kale, or I should plant mustard. But the truth is, if you're not going to eat it, that is a waste of your time and your resources and your space. Only plant what you and your family are actually going to eat. One of my first winters here in southern Arizona, I planted raised beds full of mustard and kohlrabi, and I actually hate eating mustard and kohlrabi, so it took up the space and I didn't eat any of it. If your family loves to eat a lot of salad, focus on planting a lot of leafy greens. You can succession plant those greens so that they're ready over time rather than planting them all at once. That looks like planting lettuce seeds every couple of weeks so that you have a constant supply of lettuce as you harvest it. Rather than growing mustard or things that I don't like, I focused on growing beets and carrots and all kinds of other things that I did like. I have a funny story. When I was younger, I used to tell my mom I didn't want to eat beets because I thought they tasted like dirt, but that's because I was always eating store-bought beets. That changed very quickly when I grew my first beets in the garden, and I realized that beets fresh from the soil taste nothing like beets from the store. So definitely experiment, but also know your limits on what you like and what you don't like, and use your space wisely. My next piece of advice is probably the most important lesson that I've learned as a gardener, and that is to use your space to the highest value possible. Make your decision on what to grow based upon two criteria. The first thing is to choose varieties that taste better when grown at home versus purchased in the store. Like a tomato. Everyone who loves tomatoes knows that tomatoes taste so much better fresh from the garden than any heirloom or organic tomato that you could buy at the grocery store. Another example example is a zucchini. Now, if I plant a zucchini plant, it's going to take up roughly 3 feet of space for one plant. And even if that plant produces quite a few zucchini, those zucchinis are not going to taste a whole lot different than the ones that I purchase at the store, and the ones that I purchase at the store are really not going to be that expensive. The second thing is to focus on growing varieties that cost more when purchased at the store. You can save your family a lot of money on the grocery budget by trying to grow things that are high value. This stock tank is a great example of using a small space to grow the highest value variety possible. Right now I have it planted in leafy greens because it's the cool season, but during the summer I grew a lot of cherry tomatoes. I think I had 6 cherry tomatoes in this stock tank. It's about 4 feet wide. It's a round circular stock tank, so I just staggered them around and I used a compact variety. Those plants produced so many cherry tomatoes, and if I would have bought the same amount of organic cherry tomatoes at the store, it would have cost me a lot of money. So that was a great use of the space for the value of the variety I was growing. Consumers who are interested in eating organic foods are often encouraged to look at the Dirty Dozen list. This list provides the top 12 fruits and vegetables most contaminated with pesticides. If you're on a budget and you want to choose some organic produce but maybe can't afford to buy everything organic, this will help you prioritize which items are the most important to purchase as organic. If you're interested in the list, I will leave a link to that website in the description box below. Of course, there is the sentimental value of food to consider as well. When I was growing up, for example, I loved sweet corn, particularly the Silver Queen variety. Now, the Silver Queen variety is usually not available in stores, at least not in the southern Arizona region where I live. So if I want to have that variety, I have to grow it in my garden. Now, I could consider how cheap it is to buy sweet corn at the store, and it is really cheap, and the fact that you have to grow probably at least 15 plants to be able to have good pollination of that corn in the home garden. When I think about the value of sweet corn, it's the sentimental value of being able to grow my favorite variety, Silver Queen, which is a variety I'll never be able to find in the store, particularly in the Southwest. I'm sure that you have particular varieties that are sentimental in value to you, and so worth the trade-off of space in your garden to grow. And lastly, when it comes to selecting varieties, there are certain varieties that you're just never going to find in the store. Sun Gold tomatoes are a great example. They're those little sweet yellow cherry tomatoes that people like to grow in their gardens. You are not going to find Sun Gold tomatoes in any grocery store, and that's because they're pretty delicate and they don't ship very well, and they also don't have a very long shelf life. So when grocery stores are selecting the varieties to carry on their shelves, they want something that's going to ship well and that's also going to last for more than a couple of days on their shelf until consumers come to buy it. If you have a favorite variety like a yellow meated watermelon or a specific variety of pepper or a certain kind of tomato, you may want to consider growing those yourselves. Starting things from seed and growing them in your own garden will open up a whole world of possibilities for you when it comes to variety. The next thing to consider when choosing your varieties is what will you do with the harvest? Are you interested primarily in eating things fresh from your garden, or are you planning to preserve some of those things? If you plan to preserve some of those things, do you have the time to do it? Because a lot of times things come in all at once from the garden, and if they're things that are perishable like tomatoes, you have to deal with them right away. And the third thing to consider is if you are planning on preserving them, do you have the time and the space to be able to can or dehydrate or freeze all of that produce? I have a really big garden these days, so to manage all of the produce coming out, I really try to both succession plan, and that is staggering when I'm planting all of those seeds and seedlings, but I also try to choose varieties that are ripe and ready to harvest at different times. So tomatoes are solidly rolling out of the garden in July and August, but my pumpkins aren't going to be ready until probably late November. I like to grow things to use fresh, and I also like to grow things that I can put aside and deal with later. For example, I like to grow popcorn and flower corn. I like to grow pole beans and cowpeas, and I like to grow winter squash and pumpkins. All of those things I can pick and I can put aside for later. The beans can wait in buckets for me to shell them. The corn can wait on the cob until I'm ready to separate it, and the pumpkins can just sit on a shelf or in a closet until I'm ready to eat them. What I like to do is mix a variety of things. things. I'm eating tomatoes and peppers fresh, and I've also got things that are waiting for me to eat or process or shell later on when I don't have so many time constraints in the garden. There have been so many seasons past that I had big plans on preserving and canning and having all of this stuff available in the wintertime, and then I realized not only did I not enjoy the process of it, I also did not have the time to do it. Instead, I focus on growing as much as I can in the summertime that I can eat fresh. Now, there are certain exceptions to that. I will make a few batches of tomato sauce that I roast in the oven with a little bit of garlic, blend it up, put it into freezer bags for later on in the winter. I also grow a special kind of tomatillo that I just can't find anywhere else that I love to make tomatillo enchilada sauce with. Now, those are really easy to preserve. You just remove the husk and you put them in a Ziploc bag and you freeze them whole. Later on, just pull them out of the freezer, cook them as you normally would fresh, and they're just as well used in sauces that way. I use my dehydrator a little bit for certain things like peppers and herbs. I will chop up some peppers to put in the freezer to use in tacos and things like that later on, but honestly, I don't do a lot of canning apart from making a few jars of preserves or jams during the summer. The beauty of gardening in southern Arizona is that you can garden year-round, so that means it makes it easier to eat more seasonally. In the cooler season, I'm eating more root vegetables and leafy greens, and in the summertime, I'm getting tomatoes and peppers and watermelon out of the garden, and I enjoy eating all of that fresh. But this is a very personal decision. You know what you like and you don't like, you know how much time you have, and you know your skill level. If you've never preserved anything before in the form of canning, I would encourage you to just start small, maybe get one package of jars and try your hand at it and see if you like it and see if you have the time for it. The next thing I encourage you to do is to grow a beautiful space. Mix in herbs and flowers and vegetables all together, which is called a polyculture, and that's how nature does it. If you go for a walk outside, you'll notice that in any area that's left to be natural, you'll have a mix of different kinds of plants and shrubs and trees at all different levels, and that is the healthiest and most natural way to do it. One of the drawbacks of commercial farming is that they tend to plant in a monoculture, and that is growing one variety of plant over acres of land, and that requires a lot of pesticides and herbicides and things to prevent diseases and pests from happening and ruining their crops. But in the small home garden, we don't have to worry about that. We can mix it up, and that will attract beneficial insects and it will add to the beauty of the space, and you're going to enjoy spending more time in it. And all that talk of mixed planting leads me to my next piece of advice, which is focus on building an ecosystem. According to National Geographic, an ecosystem is a geographic area where plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and landscapes, work together to form a bubble of life. If your goal is to build a productive garden in the desert, you must work to form that bubble of life. Beyond building the soil, which supports the health of the plant, we need to provide plants and habitat that are enticing for beneficial insects and pollinators. Most of us understand the importance of the honeybee when it comes to pollination, but honeybees actually do a small part of that work. The lion's share of that work is done by a whole host of insects, like beetles, wasps, butterflies, moths, and so many native bees that live in southern Arizona. These insects come in a variety of shapes and colors and sizes, and they require plants that are also of different colors, shapes, and sizes. Because insects have different sizes and kinds of mouth parts, they need to have different flower shapes to support their feeding needs. By being intentional about providing different kinds of flowers and different bloom shapes in your garden, you're going to attract and support all of the different beneficial insects that are required to make a healthy garden. The benefit of this is that you're going to create a more balanced environment in your garden, one that will support many beneficial insects that hunt all of those pests that plague your garden. This is a form of biological control that we can use rather than applying chemicals and pesticides to our garden plants, and will result in a healthier ecosystem overall. My last piece of advice is always question the rules. There are so many lists about companion plants. Always plant this with that. Never plant this with that. And it can become confusing and overwhelming to know what is right because there's a lot of conflicting information. But so much of the advice given about companion planting is not supported by research at all. I'll give an example, and one that I've used many times before, and that is about using sunflowers in the garden. I was told many times not to use sunflowers in my garden beds because they release chemicals called terpenes that inhibit the growth of other plants. But I didn't listen, and I'm so glad that I didn't, because when I planted sunflowers in my garden, it added beauty, it attracted so many different kinds of pollinators, and it also provided shade for my garden plants in the height of summer. Instead of fearing a poor outcome just because so-and-so said so, you need to try things out for yourself. You have the space that you have, so try to use it the way you want to, and you may just find that things work out when other people say that it won't. Overall, I just encourage you to grow a garden that you're going to enjoy spending time in. I grow a lot of vegetables in my garden because I like to experiment with food and I like to try new varieties that are just not available in the store. Someone else may love to grow a flower garden or a rose garden or a cactus garden. It's such an expression of your own personal interests and values, so I encourage you to grow a garden that fits you. I hope all of this advice will help get your creative juices flowing and to help you avoid some of the hard lessons that I've had to learn over the years. I wish you luck with creating the garden that you're dreaming about, however that may look. I'm Kara from Arizona. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy gardening.